the networking piece is the key, right? Along with the money, is
Yeah.
how rich your network is and how much effort you're putting into it. So I think that's another key kind of thing on the list, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
done through groups like this or just on your own accord.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey, Rachel, I just sent you that text. Will you just scan it real fast before we go live?
Okay. Let me put this in front of me. This is what I mean about having a camera. It would almost be nice. Okay. Give me a second. Um, oh gosh. Maybe I should keep my glasses on. Let's hope my Wi-Fi doesn't go out in the middle of this. It went out about an hour and a half ago. So if it does,
we hope your Wi-Fi doesn't go out in the middle of this.
if it does, just continue the conversation.
That would be bad.
Yeah, you have to tell jokes. You have to buy us time.
No, it's okay. I'm sure you guys will, have a robust conversation going. So I'm sure you guys can carry it. And Annie, how is it that we do it? Do you want me to count down or how do you want to do it before we go live?
So what we're going to do is I'll count us down and we'll go live and then wait 20 seconds just because there's a slight delay on Zoom to let people come into the room. So everyone will just have to be silent for 20 seconds, Rachel, and then just dive in.
Okay. Let's see.
Thank you everyone for being here. Really appreciate it. Your time. Oh, I need to change my picture.
Uh-oh. I should take my... How can we do this? Mute.
Okay, Rachel, are you ready?
As ready as I'll ever be.
Okay, Jessica, you are on mute, just so you know, in case. Okay, cool. So I'm going to count us down, and then if you can just wait about 20 seconds, that'd be great. So 5, 4, 3, 2.
Welcome to today's strategy session from .LA in partnership with Plugin South LA. My name is Rachel Uranga, I'm your host, and we're talking about is South LA the next tech hub? We have some great guests with us, but before we get started, I'm just going to go through some housekeeping. First of all, during this time, we're going to be taking audience participation. So we'd love to hear from you if you have questions or anything you'd like to bring. Plugin South LA is hosting its virtual summit kicking off this Tuesday called Urban Tech Connect. It's a 3-day conference in which our speakers today, Sean, Jessica, and Sheila, will be attending. In addition, please save the date for .LA Summit, October 27th and 28th, which will consist 2 days of speaker programming, networking, social events, and more. And lastly, nominations are open for .LA Awards. Please visit our website to nominate a founder and company. All right, let's get started. Can South LA be the next tech hub? I'd like to welcome our guests, Sheila Marmon, Jessica Santana, and Sean Gunn, and I'll let them introduce themselves because I know that they probably can introduce themselves a lot better than I can. Go ahead, Sheila.
Good afternoon. I guess good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, the .LA team, for having me. My name is Sheila Marmon. I am the founder of Mirror Digital. We're a digital media company focused on helping leading brands reach multicultural consumers. I'm a native Los Angelina, actually from South LA, and I have been part of the LA tech ecosystem since its inception back in the mid 2000s. So really excited to be here and really excited for this conversation. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Jessica?
Hi, everyone. It's very nice to meet each and every one of you. And thank you to the .LA team for inviting me to be a part of the conversation. As mentioned, my name is Jessica Santana. I'm co-founder of America on Tech. America on Tech is a national nonprofit organization on a mission to prepare the next generation of technology leaders. We expanded after operating 5 years in New York City to Los Angeles and are working with students in the South Los Angeles region over the past year. So very excited to be a part of this conversation, and I look forward to hearing what my fellow panelists have to share.
Sean, you want to go ahead?
Sure, and once again, thank you for having me here. I'm super excited. My name is Sean Gunn. I'm co-founder and CEO of a company called Play. Play is a artificial intelligence-driven wager platform for skill-based video games. I am probably the newest Los Angeles person here, resident. I moved here 5 years ago from the East Coast to build out this business and invest in some other tech companies. So super bullish on LA from a different set of different perspectives. Thanks for having me.
Great. All right. Well, let's just first, for those who aren't from Los Angeles and talking about who may be looking at this from the outside, where is South Los Angeles? So I'm just going to kind of give a little bit of an overview so people know where it's at. It's south of the 10 freeway, encompasses, at least for our purposes or the way I'm looking at it, is it encompasses about 28 communities. It spans it spans from the Alameda corridor to Baldwin Hills and the Imperial Highway, which is Highway 105. And it's part of an area that's been largely segregated because of discriminatory housing laws, et cetera. It was once largely African-American, about 80%, and the region now is about 2/3 Latino, and it continues to have sort of higher poverty rates than the rest of the city, higher housing insecurity. But aside from some of the economic problems, there is, as we all know here, a flood of creativity, entrepreneurship, hustle in the area. And there's been, I would say, and we could talk about this, there's been a lot of efforts to create opportunities and sort of change the narrative in the region as of late, especially when we look at the tech world. Let's see, what else can we say? It's probably, I guess for people who are not from Los Angeles, it's like home of West Coast rap. That's sort of how it's been in the popular imagination. But like I said, it's been so much more. And certainly that connection in history has been built upon. I think people, more recently think of Nipsey Hussle and his investment partner, David Gross, who were looking to invest there with real estate and sort of reimagine how investment is distributed in there. And there's also Plugin South LA, which is a network for founders. It's down there. There's Grid 110, which is an accelerator, and they've been providing entrepreneurs and access to mentors and resources. And I think this year they have their first South LA cohort. So congratulations to them. And lastly, there is the Beehive, which is my understanding, it's gonna be underway. It's gonna be opening next year. I don't know how coronavirus is changing that, but it is an opportunity zone for businesses. There's a tech component down there. And so there's a lot going on. There's a lot of money that's been invested in there. And so I guess let's start off like with, can South Los Angeles be the next tech hub? What will that take? I don't know, Sean, you want to go ahead and start?
Yeah, absolutely. I think is the answer. And I think for a few reasons. One, you touched on, there is governmental and community money coming in. And obviously, we hope that trend continues at a much higher rate after COVID. But because of that rich cultural kind of history, and if you look now, fast forward, a lot of entrepreneurs, business leaders, but also arts and cultural entertainment figures that have both resources to drive visibility as well as funding. And I think that's part of the power, right? It's not just a business exercise. It's the fact that arts, tech, business, community have always been in this area, and now we're trying to contemporize that. So I think the answer is absolutely yes.
Sheila?
So I mentioned briefly in my introduction that I have been so I lived in the East Coast for many years, but I've been back in LA since the tech community started really to grow here. And so I think we have a roadmap of what success can look like when we look at some of the other tech hubs in the city. So back in 2008, there was one conference that was based in San Francisco that would also come down here. There were a few people talking about tech. We've always had the really amazing university system, and kind of the OGs, Idea Lab out in Pasadena, doing really innovative things. But back to Sean's point, sort of contemporizing what was going on, we saw people start to gather both informally and formally. So let's gather people at conferences, let's gather people at happy hours, let's just create connections between people who are interested in doing things in tech. So providing some sort of platform or space for people to just get together and get to know each other and know kind of what skills are, know what their interests are. I think that is, the first step. So how do we get people together so that they know one another and that they can come together to collaborate and build together?
And Jessica, you're working with a lot of the youth. I mean, how do you see that playing out for them in building and creating a sort of tech hub?
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that I have the privilege every day to work with young people across the country, specifically in South LA. I believe that young people have an opportunity to be positioned for 21st century careers. I think the educational system in terms of K through 12 has a huge appetite for embedding technical skills courses or just non-engineering courses that are maybe hybrid within their classrooms to actually like bring educational content that prepare them for these kinds of opportunities in the future. And I know that the young people that we specifically work with have an appetite for technology. I think for a lot of what we do, it's helping young people reimagine the way that they engage with technology in the first place so that they can see themselves as creators of it and not just the ones who are on the platforms creating the content. And I think that, for the young people that we work with, many of them are first generation in their family in this country. Many of them have been here for a long time as well. And so, the idea of generational poverty has obviously taken a toll on the way that they see opportunity in their own communities. But I truly believe that with the appropriate investments, with the appropriate narrative, and with the appropriate interest in developing talent in the area, that places like South LA, where young people have an opportunity to be competitive in the larger technology ecosystem across the country.
Well, I think that's an important point. And I want to talk a little bit about how we get there, but sort of this idea of narrative and the narrative that people tell themselves, the narrative that other people tell them. Especially Sheila, I mean, you're working in sort of that creative field. And and I guess I want to know how does that play into it? And also, how important is it that you're bringing these resources to where people live as opposed to them just having access to it just outside of where they live?
Yeah, I think both of those elements are so important. So I'll start with media. So I run a media company and we empower diverse creators. So that can be people who run websites or people who are personalities on social media, podcasters, just people who have a platform and a voice, and we help them monetize and grow their businesses. And our creators are creators of color, Black, Asian, and Latino. And I'm so passionate about the work that we do because we have to have the place to tell our own stories and define our own narratives. And that is so important. So when you talk about shifting narrative, you know, I grew up in South LA, very under-resourced, where, you know, gang violence was prevalent. It was right after the crack epidemic. So like every urban challenge that you could imagine was kind of part of what I grew up experiencing. And thinking about what I could do, I always said, you know, what can I do to affect change? And that's really what created the seeds for me to want to be an entrepreneur. So it's so critical for young people to feel that sense of ownership and empowerment and agency, like I can do something to make my situation better, to make my community better. And the only way they start to think about that is if they're exposed to it. And that goes back to the other point you were saying, Rachel, about having people come into the community versus saying, okay, I go out of the community to see all these innovators and experience what's going on in technology and see all this opportunity, but that's not my story. That's not where I'm from. That's not, you know, where I am. So bringing that in, and I think that's something that Plugin has been so masterful at doing, is really bringing those innovators to the community. So we were talking earlier about some of the early stuff that Plugin was doing, and I was taking some notes. So back in 2015, Plugin launched Digital and Beyond, and it was just a gathering at a theater, and it was like community leaders and some folks in tech, and the goal was to just get folks out to the Lamert Vision Theater to come and hear about what is technology and what is innovation. And from those conversations, you start to build that sense that there can be a tech community here and who needs to be in the mix and how do we get those folks involved. And I think all those things were really critical to put us on this path to where we're starting to see real opportunity in South LA.
Sean, did you want to jump in? I see you.
No, I wanted to piggyback just, you know, how we all learn, right, is we like to be in spaces that are safe, right? And I think it's an important factor of, it's easy to tell a young person, oh, just go to Santa Monica and go to this conference or, you know, go somewhere like that. You're not always felt welcome there, right? Or you have your defenses up. And so when you see people, men and women that kind of look like you and are potentially going down a path that you want to go down, but they're coming into your environment, that means a lot because then we start to feel things are achievable. All the other things still need to be in place, right? But just that narrative that you tell yourself and that you can see and touch is super important. So I totally agree with that.
And how do you, I mean, Jessica, like, because you're working with young people, how do you sort of demystify this for them? I mean, are there exercises that you give them or you help sort of like pull, you know, open the curtain?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I always say, and I just want to just add to like the previous question, because if I don't say this, I'm going to regret it. But I truly believe that a lot of times, you know, when you're from the hood, because I'm from the hood in Brooklyn, and though it's not South LA, it's comparable, right? And a lot of people would ask, well, you know, what did you do to make it out? And I think it was important in those moments for me to say, like, it was never a maze that I was trying to escape from in the first place. There's so much cultural capital when you look at the collective intelligence of our communities. And though you are not a part of it to experience all those things, it is important for you to understand that no matter where I go, I'm always going to represent, you know, for the underdog. And so I think when I created America on Tech with my co-founder in 2014, it was important for us to realize that we never wanted to paint a narrative for our young people. We wanted our young people to exercise the agency and the power that they had within their own voices to design solutions for community problems that they saw within their own schools, within their own neighborhoods. And so while we are an introduction to technical skills and to making sure that they are able to create products and services, we are not designing experiences for them. We're giving them the tools so that they can design experiences for themselves. Because so often we see people go into communities with really good intentions and not really understanding that there were people that already have lived here for years and years and years that already have ideas on how they can solve their own community's issues. And maybe the gap for them is just the tools and the resources and maybe the connections they need to make those things happen. And so when I think about the work, the way that we have, created an atmosphere for young people at America on Tech is just by introducing them to new concepts and to new tools and to new resources, but never taking away the things that make them uniquely themselves. And if you look at a lot of our curriculum, we have a lot of culturally relevant things within our curriculum, whether it be like, Fresh Prince memes, or making sure that we have LeBron talking about STEM in there. You know what I mean? All of those things really do resonate with them. And I think, if you empower young people and you design experiences in a way that actually leverages their collective intelligence rather than trying to come into communities and saying, this is the way that you do it, follow our roadmap, then you actually position them for long-term success because it is more sustainable. Their level of familiarity is unimpeachable with the community's problems that they're trying to solve. So why try and come in a lot of times making big promises for a community that you're not in close proximity to and try to design for them when you can just empower them to do it themselves.
Right. I mean, even what you said at the very beginning sort of struck me when people tell you, how did you make it out? As if you're trying to always escape where you come from. I mean, people don't ask people from other neighborhoods, how did you make it out? Right. I mean, nobody wants to leave their home or who they are or their identity. So obviously that's really important. And I think that kind of goes to this other idea of how do you create community that we touched around is this idea of networks and creating and building networks that may not look like the other networks, right, that are partly homegrown. And so, Sean, I know we were talking a little bit before this about how intentional people are and how that helps build tech hubs and tech communities. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think being intentional comes from both sides, right? As entrepreneurs or other parts of the infrastructure, being intentional about helping people, right? And to Jessica's point, leaning in and trying to understand how you can be of service to help younger folks, but also other people in the ecosystem, right? From a business perspective and community perspective. But then I know for me, I had to, as a young person, be much more intentional about leaning in on creating a network, right? And many times during the course of whether you're in any type of business or especially as an entrepreneur, a lot of your lifeblood and your success is driven by your ability to connect with different people, whether it's trying to learn or gain resources or mentorship. And so that intentionality goes from both sides, right? And it has to be part of what we kind of teach each other. There's no need not to have help, right? And not to ask for help or kind of lean in. And so I think that's super important. That's why, Plug and Play and others are important because many times that can be the first step, right? That in-person exchange and sitting at a seminar and hearing, Jessica or Sheila talk, and then that kind of breaks the wall down. And then you can kind of make the next 50 steps. But that's a big part of building any of these businesses in these communities is the investment in networking.
Sheila, you want to piggyback on that? I mean, obviously you've been part of this network for a while and help building it up.
Yeah. So again, and I think a large part of it is bringing folks into the community and creating a space in the community. The thing that is interesting is that you plug in looks a lot different from a typical tech conference because there is such a focus on the next generation. So there are lots of young people, there are lots of college students, there are lots of students, high school students. And the goal is not only to help the current generation of founders get put on, who can you talk to? Who can you talk to about your idea, your funding, building a team, but also what about that next generation of potential founders? So the notion of, who can, you can't be what you can't see, and how do we intentionally commingle these groups so that there's a real sense of community and that I belong here. And again, in thinking about how do we build on this, I think again, learning from the other tech hubs in LA, it'll be really interesting to see what happens once Beehive launches, because there hasn't been a co-working space. That was one of the big goals that, we talked about a lot at Plugin early on, is how do you create that physical space for co-location, for actually getting the work done. So not having that space, not having an accelerator with a physical space in South LA, I think is a challenge. So, most of, there's about 30 accelerators in LA, give or take, and you can map them out, and they literally form a ring around South LA when you plot them out on a map. There's Santa Monica and Culver City and downtown LA, and then you can go down into like the El Segundo area, and even over the hill in the valley, there are a couple. So thinking about right in the middle of the city, where can we bring those resources in to help build the ecosystem, I think is a no-brainer.
Okay, did you have anything to add to that, or? Okay, well, I want to build on that, and I think obviously, we could have the networks in place, we could have even have the accelerators, but when you don't have any money and it's difficult to have a million great ideas and no money behind it. And so I guess I'm interested in talking about how you start to build capital in the area, where even investors who are looking to put capital in the area, where they go, how do they start? And Sheila, maybe I'll start with you, and then we can kind of circle around. And Sean, I'd love to hear, as a founder, some of your experiences trying to raise capital. So, you want to go ahead, Sheila?
So my experience kind of being out in the market raising capital, I raised a little bit of pre-seed money back in 2013, and it was the most difficult thing I'd ever done. And literally I raised like no money. And I relied heavily, like I'm privileged in the sense of some of the networks from where I went to school. I went to Ivy League schools for undergraduate and graduate school. And so I had those networks to lean into to help me navigate and to just kind of force the hand to get some money into the company. So a lot of folks don't have that, and there was no clear path into the venture community outside of that. So I was really, trying to find allies in different groups and angel groups to help me navigate. Fast forward, I think the community has changed a lot. I think that there are a lot more funds dedicated to female founders, dedicated to founders of color. I think of Harlem Capital as an example of a very well-known one that is very well funded. I think of what's going on at Backstage, that is another, kind of very well-known entity. But I don't feel like the general venture ecosystem has really opened up. So I still feel like there is, you can go to these special designated funds, but it's all the other funds. I feel like it's still harder to get some of those traditional funds to look at founders of color in general, whether you're in South LA or whether you're in Santa Monica. But that's my sense of kind of what's going on in the market. But I think Sean has much more personal information.
I just want to add here, but before you go ahead, Sean. I mean, what you say is all true, right? I mean, we know this. We know with the numbers. The recent survey, I think by NBCA, is saying like 77% of founders are white. Just 1% of venture-backed founders are Black. Latino founders were 1.8% of those receiving money, and women-funded startups received about 9% of investment. So, I mean, it's no one's imagination, right? I mean, this is well documented and pretty clear that there is more money out there, but it's still a sliver of the billions and billions of dollars that are on the table.
Yeah, so early stage capital raising, no matter what color you are, is hard, right? I think it's just set up that way, right? It's one of the toughest things you ever do. And people that have done it multiple times like I have are lunatics, but that's for another conversation. For people of color, female founders, it's increasingly almost, impossible, right? The numbers kind of show it. Although people are achieving through it, it's still very small percentages. And so, to put it nicely, there's a lot of room for growth in the connection between VCs and that ecosystem. What I implore, founders of color to do is we have to, until that gap closes, be super creative, right? So the good thing is there's a lot of other vehicles that have opened up that we can take advantage of, things like crowdfunding and to point made earlier, some of the super early stage accelerators. I think those are really good, especially for first time founders, because they generally are surrounding you with mentorship and other resources that sometimes cost money, right, to operate a company. But it also goes back to part of the, I think, opportunity in LA is that because we do have so many industries that are colliding here in a very good way with entertainment, tech, sports, things like that, there are high net worth individuals that are starting to open up to the concept of becoming early stage investors. Some have been widely publicized, companies that some of us have invested in or operating. But I think that's part of the key, right? Because those can be some of your super angels that help in those very early stages. As you build that company and it gets more visibility, then the institutional dollar sometimes start to take wind of it, right? But it's super hard from like idea to like A, right? And that's where you have to be really creative. My hope is just like for the overall venture market for Los Angeles, that just need more exits, right, of big companies and nationally known. We need that in our community, right? We need a few female-owned, people of color businesses to run the kind of marathon. Because what happens is, and we've seen it with the Googles and the Facebooks, is that trickle down of entrepreneurs that started those companies and people that work there that now have, made some really good money on it, exit or IPO, that just really gets thrown into the community, right? And so that's where we're all fighting to get to a couple of those to kind of open up the ecosystem.
Sorry, I was on mute. And I think one thing you did point out there is, and we've seen that in South Los Angeles, is that there are a lot of high net worth individuals, people that have made it in the creative world that are investing in the community. And they definitely are not only providing capital, but also sort of doing it in a way that sort of doing it in their own way, not looking for the same types of returns that maybe other individuals might be. I wonder if you think, I mean, if you've thought about this much, and maybe Sheila, this is to you and to Jessica, how do we get capital into this community and prevent it from being co-opted, from being gentrified and usurped and displacing the very people that you're trying to help? I think that's a tension that's sort of always running through this when you're talking about, selling out or, bringing money in and changing a narrative.
Jessica, do you want to go first?
Oh, sure. Well, I think that it's a really interesting question because we've seen examples of how when technology moves into communities, it also pushes out people who've been there and have done that. I truly believe that with strong policy in place, then you can actually prevent those things from happening. But that also means that you have to have an educated community base to make sure that they are voting in politicians that are going to be representative of their interests. And so knowing that a lot of times, folks in like places like South LA, that don't have money, sometimes they can't back those same politicians. I think it becomes a larger issue around like, who are we empowering to make good decisions about the future of our community? So that's my first thing, is just make sure you have really strong policy. I think the second thing is businesses need to understand that as they move into communities, they are also agents of change in those communities and in the spaces that they occupy in. And so it is only beneficial to them to actually invest in those communities from an educational perspective, from a workforce perspective. And I truly believe that we need to stop talking about young people or talent or communities from a place of deficit, as if they have nothing of value. And this is not, a charitable contribution. This is a return on your bottom line. If you're looking for talent and you're saying you can't find any locally, yeah, I have hundreds of students that are going to graduate, from high school and potentially not go to college and not have jobs. We need to start thinking about this a little bit more creatively and stop being lazy about it. And I think maybe my last point is probably is making sure that when we're thinking about when we're thinking about the establishment of companies in an area, maybe Google doesn't have to come to South LA, right? Microsoft doesn't need a place there. But what person is in South LA right now, that needs money, that needs, support and resources, and let's pour into those people. We can create jobs within the communities themselves, rather than relying on companies and institutions that weren't designed for us or by us to give us the pennies. And so for me, I think it's just changing the narrative around making sure that people understand that this is not a charitable investment, that this is an investment in solving community problems that lead to better contributing citizens in our country, lead to better hiring pipelines, lead to better educational outcomes for young people, lead to, and because of good educational outcomes, it leads to economic empowerment and the reduction of job loss. And so I think it's a trickle down effect, in my opinion. But I also think it takes folks to be very visionary during a time where everything feels like it's breaking. But I truly believe with the right vision and the right people and the shifting of the narrative from it being, oh, these folks need our help, to no, this is a good investment. I think those are some of the things that can propel that forward and do it with integrity.
When you're talking about a company going in there and trying to make an investment, I mean, it sounds like what you're saying too is not just putting investment in there and letting it run as the company would run, but actually putting people in the community who know the community well in charge, so that there's ownership and it's not something that's sort of run outside, especially when you're thinking about how to sort of navigate that. I mean, there's obviously different models when you're kind of making an investment, but I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is you really want somebody there who's in charge, who knows the community, and it's not just, a satellite office for them where somebody from somewhere else is in charge.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, when we initially talked about this a few days ago, I said that at this point in time, people just have to start writing checks and seeing where we land, right? Invest in the potential and the promise, because if you're looking for data in a place where there is no data as of yet, you're not really setting anything up for success. I actually rather people try things and actually maybe fail at them, right? Because there is a potential for failure, than actually not try at all. And if you look at places like South LA that were historically Black, that now are majority Latino, people think that, these places just don't have any buying power. But if our collective buying power as Black and brown people is over the trillions of dollars, so we're not going to act like we don't have power in our dollars, or even power in our words and power in our thoughts. And so I think it's just a matter of people needing to, the same way that you're going to take it's going to be risky for me to say, but the same way that you're going to take a risk on the white man who has the idea, you should take a risk on the Black and brown founders and the women who already have the traction and the product and the service that's actually already solving problems. What is the real issue? And I think for me, like, we need to just start writing the checks. But I'm going to step away from my soapbox now.
Well, I mean, there's lots of points I want to get back to. I kind of want to finish this idea about like not creating harm in the community as you invest in it. Because I think there's a lot of important points you made, Jessica. And I mean, let's go back to that. But Sheila, circling back, I mean, there is this always like this tension, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the way you circumvent that, I mean, there's not one way. So I think all models have to be accepted and tried because there's so much work to be done. So I don't want to say, this is the one way. But I think back to Jessica's point,
Sure.
the key factor is inclusion. Like, okay, so folks in the community don't necessarily have to be in charge right away, but how do you include them in a meaningful way so that they have a seat at the table? And that's just not about, oh, that's a nice to do. It's a really important business imperative. And I look at the model, I think one of the most successful models, and it's not in tech directly, but what Magic Johnson Enterprises has done. So here you have someone who really understood the nuances of what doing business in South LA was going to be like, or in communities of color as he expanded nationwide. And he brought that specific knowledge about the community to business partners who had the capital, who had the business model to expand those into communities of color. So when you look at Starbucks coming into South LA, it looks different because Magic Johnson has an ownership stake. There are community there are community programs that are part of those establishments. So I think that there is a model that we can leverage what is the best in that community in terms of creativity, in terms of specific knowledge, in terms of know-how, and marry that with capital and other processes to create a win-win situation. But where we run into trouble, Rachel, back to your original question, is when folks come in and disregard or don't include the community that they're coming into, and no matter what that model looks like. So how do you get folks who are the boots on the ground really integrated into what you're trying to accomplish?
And please, I guess I should have said this before, feel free to jump in. I mean, don't wait on me to go. I mean, I'm certainly don't want to be an arbitrator here. I just love to hear if some thoughts pop into your head. So certainly, right? I mean, that's definitely one sort of way to think about it, and to think about how you can create more opportunity without doing more harm. I wonder, I want to go back to Jessica's point about sort of all the richness that's in these communities that often is sort of not leveraged, right? I mean, you were talking about the buying power and also sort of the influence. And especially that's true now, right? As we see everybody having the democratization of media and people having more access to it. And when you look at even who are moviegoers, I mean, they tend to be a higher percentage of TV watchers, media, et cetera, Black and brown people. So I wonder if you can talk, and Sean, maybe you can start us off about some of the opportunities and sort of richness in this community that often don't come to the fore, or sort of aren't top on people's minds, and how it's untapped.
Well, yeah, I think
I know
it's a lot, yeah, but I think it's Sheila brought up a very good point of kind of what we have to do to fix it in a couple of ways, right? The lack of inclusion in established businesses coming in the community, whether that's a good or a bad thing, is one reason it's not being tapped into, right? Because if you don't respect that talent pool and buying power, if that's not your focal customer, then you kind of assume it's going to do whatever it's going to do. So that needs to change, and I think that's a whole nother conversation. But I think many entrepreneurs that are, Black and brown, totally get that, right? We grew up in these households, right? We understand the buying power and the intelligence level and the super aggressiveness around learning and understanding, right? And that's part of that top line narrative change that has to happen for us to kind of change some of these other roadblocks. I think from a business operator, I've seen nothing but good things come out of giving young people opportunity, right, to be a part of businesses that probably generally wouldn't be accessible to them, right? And I think the great thing, one of the good things that's come out of COVID is the limitation on being located somewhere. I think it's changing the thesis where now people can't just say, oh, you don't live here, so you can't be a part of this opportunity, or you're not my customer demo. That's being thrown out the window, right? And people are now open to resources and talent that exist everywhere. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us to say, hey, now that those walls are down, let's change that whole engagement point, right? But I do think we have to start telling a much deeper story around this isn't a freebie or charity, to Jessica's point. It's around opportunity. All people want is an opportunity to be a part of something. They're going to work hard. They're going to, put the extra effort in, and they're going to buy it, right? Unbeknownst to most popular demands, Black and brown folks like tech, right? They like cutting edge stuff. They like to know what the new game is, or the new, device. And
whatever, right? They want
exactly.
the hot thing.
Right. And to be quite honest with you, conversations I've had with, folks on my cap table and influencers, we actually are what makes most things that go viral. We do that, right? We're the ones that make that happen from a pop culture perspective. And so it's high time that whole ecosystem trickles down, right? Not just LeBron, who, by the way, does an amazing job across the board, but to the kid that's LeBron's fan that's buying his things, right, from those corporate entities and startups, right? And so I think that's part of our next evolution, is tying the entire value chain together, right? It's the top line influencer, athlete, the startup getting it funded for a great idea, and then being respectful to the Black and brown consumer, right? And that's got to be part of that goal, because it actually will then make the entire thing work at a much higher rate, and we can change some of these, bad storylines.
Right. And the demographics are obviously going that way. I mean, I think in California, minority majority state. So and a bellwether for the rest of the country, right, where so much innovation is. I think you would be ignorant to ignore it. Sheila, did you want to add in on what Sean was saying?
No, I mean, I think that inclusion is the key point. And I don't think that you don't have to overcomplicate it. Going back to what Jessica was saying about, her students being ready, everybody is not going to be a founder of a company, and that's okay. Just hire somebody, and it's just, there are so many barriers to even just kind of first level getting your foot in the door, because people aren't in these informal networks where people are finding their employees. Just go out of your way. If you are running a company in the innovation economy, just go find a person of color and hire them. So, that is just the very first step, and will make a huge difference.
Right.
And to that point, right? I think what we're asking is, give them the same chance to screw up or succeed like you would anyone else, right?
Absolutely.
I think so many times a company or individual founder that gives that one person that shot, the whole weight of the world is on that kid or that female, that's the first Black, woman in the company. And that's not fair, right? They should have the same opportunity to make mistakes and succeed as anyone else. And so I think that's the key mind shift, right?
Right. Okay. So I want to go back to something. I mean, completely agreed. Let's open the doors a little. But Jessica's seen this sort of on the front lines when she's asking companies, right? Hey, here's somebody who's graduating or who's ready. And we had a conversation a couple of days ago about some of the things that she's heard from people. And I mean, it shouldn't be, it's surprising and it's shocking and not shocking at all, right? Jessica, we were talking about what kind of standards people have. Maybe you want to share a little bit of what you hear when you ask people to open the door.
Yeah, it's so interesting because we've been doing this work now for 6 years. And now I've not only seen it in New York, I've also seen it here in Los Angeles. So, and now I know it's a nationwide thing. It's definitely not a New York thing. But I would say that, like, I think that there is this misconception that if you are from certain neighborhoods or you go to certain schools, then you can only do certain things, and that your potential is capped at a certain place because you don't have the things that make hiring managers feel safe about opening doors to employment to you. And so, a lot of times in the process of our employment pipeline, we've gotten questions about whether or not hiring an American Tech student is lowering the bar, or if, hiring American Tech students, are they good kids? And I always stop in those moments to ask, like, well, what would make you think that they're bad kids? And what would make you think that you're lowering the bar, right? Because some of the smartest people I still know at the age of, like, actually, I'm not going to age myself, but some of the smartest people I know, I left in the projects in Brooklyn, and some of the smartest people I know are in the schools that we work with and have no Ivy League degrees. And some of the dumbest people I know have Ivy League degrees, right? And so for me, I always wonder, like, why we have these key performance indicators that were created under the guise of white supremacy a lot of times that make people feel safe about providing opportunities to people who don't fit a traditional mold. And I think when I talk about American Tech students, it's important for everyone to know that regardless of where they're from, regardless of their geography, regardless if they're the first in their family to do anything, regardless if they went to, Cal State versus Harvard, they deserve the same opportunities to compete fairly for 21st century opportunities, whether they are doing that as an employees of an organization, whether they're doing that as founders. But it feels, a lot of times that by default of who we're advocating for, that companies believe that it might be lowering the bar with working with our young people. But I always say, like, look at what they've produced. You have 18 to 24-year-olds creating real products and services in our programs from scratch. Like, some of them have gone to college, some of them have not. And there are people that have 4-year degrees that haven't even been able to do any of this in such a short period of time. So how about you just take a chance? And you'll notice that once companies do take a chance, we've had almost a 100% employer retention rate. But that initial sell requires people to, I think, be so visionary and, like, be so open-minded in the initial stages that if you don't ever take that chance, then you'll never know, like, what our young people can actually do. So on the front lines, this work does get hard because you are advocating for a community of people that have traditionally been left out of the conversation. And outside of the fact that they've already been trained and they've already been, gone through our programs, like, they still, regardless sometimes of the training, just by default of who they are and how they show up, are already at a disadvantage. And so, I encourage everyone to really take chances on young people, on founders. I think that, that is really the way that you'll be able to, decide whether or not these investments are worth it to you. Because on our end, once people have taken chances, they've seen the results have been insurmountable. But it does take for people to, shift their mind.
Yeah, definitely. So there's some questions I want to make sure that I get them in there. And one I think is directed towards you, Jessica. It says, does the South LA school system have an education and training component that channels students towards careers in tech companies and or encourage students to develop their own tech ideas? And I'm assuming that's mostly, I know you work largely with charter schools, and maybe you want to talk a little bit about how you work in the system and how many students you have.
Yeah. So on an annual basis, and nationally, we work with about 1,000 students per year. Here in LA, though, we've only been here a year. We kicked off our second school year, so we're only working with 150 students. One thing that we've noticed is that schools do have an appetite for creating technical education programs under their career and technical education verticals in order to filter students into technical careers, either directly after high school or getting them into a 2-year or 4-year program in computer engineering or computer science and information systems. What we've noticed, though, is that there is a difference between having an appetite for this and then adding dollars to your budget that lead to high quality technology education, right? Because in our minds, you can't just expose students to computational thinking and then think that things get solved, right? And that like now they're employable. There are hard and really specific skills that students need to learn in order to be employable. So I think what happens is that the school has all of the good intentions, but they don't have the infrastructure, nor the capacity, nor the actual technical understanding or know-how to embed high quality courses within their classrooms. So they tend to start using open source curriculums that are not really leading young people to employability. And they also don't have the dollars a lot of times to support programs like ours that is bringing that hardcore technical component with an industry focus into their classrooms. And so that's why we raise a lot of money via American Tech, and we've structured a nonprofit model because our customer actually can't really afford our services. And we don't want to sell to affluent communities because they're going to be okay without us, right? We're very intentional about who we want to work with. And so I think that the LA school system, they are both LAUSD charter schools. I think there's an appetite there. And then even I would say like there are a lot of community efforts that have an appetite to bridge education and technology jobs for young people. There's an organization called Pixel Exchange that runs a Los Angeles Tech Talent Pipeline internship program. They've also been doing a lot of webinars for young people focused on career readiness and professional development. So I think the appetite is there. But I always say that you can't be hungry and then not have money to buy it, because the reality of the situation is that we should be pouring money into solutions and not thinking that things are just going to be free. But I think that they definitely want it, and I think they see the value in it.
Okay. All right. Well, and we're coming towards the end here. I want to go around and give everyone a chance. It looks like we don't have any more questions. That was the one question. I'm glad we got that answered though, and I appreciate that. So it sounds like they do have educational and training components, but they're not really fully realized, and they're just poor, essentially.
Yeah, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, both poor, like underfunded, and not the high quality as well, right?
And I would also say just poorly executed. I think, people can be mad at me, but I just think that I think I am an operator, and I really, my mind works in systems. And so once I see a flaw in the way a process is working, or the way learning is working, or the way that, like outcomes for young people are working post, program success, it doesn't resonate with me in terms of it being successful.
Yeah. Okay, we actually got one more question. I could read the question. I'm not sure that I quite clearly understand what it, okay. I'll say it's from Tanya Hughes. She says, capitalism was never set up to work for those who created it. Inequality, not just a flaw in the system, is the core of its design. It's difficult to get people to understand something when their salary depends on them not understanding it. Is advertising and social media stewards of this inevitable fate? I don't know that I quite, but I think what she's getting at, I think what she's or he, she, he, I'm not sure. My apologies. Is that advertising and social media sort of perpetuate this, right? That's your point, that we're big consumers of a lot of this money generating media, but we're not the money and the capital behind it, right? We're not the owners of it. We're the players in it often. And I think that's kind of the tension, and how do we create more of that? And I think Sheila, obviously what you're working on, go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the things that has been interesting in the last 15 years is really, we talked about this earlier, is the democratization of media.
Right.
So if you have a voice or if you have a message, there are low-cost ways to help amplify that. And some of them you can own and some of them you don't own. So to the point about being on a platform like Instagram or YouTube or Facebook, those are not owned. Certainly a way to get started, but you can set up your own website. You can set up your own platform to have a place to tell your story. So I think that that's something that's been dramatically different and really allowed for creators to who are outside of the main entertainment ecosystem to find a way in and be successful. So that's kind of one point, but I want to address the point of capitalism. And I am a capitalist, and I think that we have to find market-rooted solutions to the challenges that we're facing in South LA and in other under-resourced communities. I think that it's great that we had Grid 110 come in and do a cohort in South LA. That's a community, nonprofit. We have a plug-in doing amazing work, also a nonprofit. But I think when we start to tie outcomes to profit, then you can have systemic change. And I'm not saying the community work is not vital. It is absolutely critical. But to build on it and I think sustain it, I think we have to have market-driven answers. So that is creating jobs that people can be hired into. That is creating companies that people can own and operate their own destiny and build generational wealth. That will actually close the wealth gaps that we see in these communities. And I think that it is allowing companies in South LA to be part of these broader economic ecosystems that will allow all boats to rise. And that's, that's not, kumbaya. That's just looking at how do we use the market to our advantage. So I love what we're doing with all the public-private partnerships. I think that is the stopgap to help move South LA into a place where we can be the next tech hub. But I think in the long term, they do have to be rooted in market-driven systems where people are making a profit.
That's a really great answer, and it sort of wraps it up. I want to give you each about 30 seconds to give us your last thoughts. Sean, you want to go ahead? We'll go Sean, Jessica, and Sheila, and you can see us off.
Yeah, no, that was well said by Sheila. The only thing I would add to that is a reminder: proximity matters, right? So, we talk about money and all this other good stuff, but getting young people access to how to do things and how companies operate, whether they become founders or whatever, just that knowledge can be super important. So I encourage people to do that.
Right.
I think for me, it's just I want to encourage anyone who attended today to just reimagine what you think is unimaginable. I think a lot of times when we give ourselves the permission to think big, amazing things happen. I think some ways, somehow, in some capacity, when we think of places like South LA, we don't tie those things to big dreams. And I think it's important for us to give ourselves an opportunity to act upon the same privileges that other people in other communities around our country are operating under.
And I'll just end by saying, all ideas are welcome. So South LA is open for business, and it's going to take a lot of people to move it onto a path of full realization, economically and otherwise. And so let's get everybody in the pool.
Thank you guys so much. I thought it was a great conversation, and the Plug-in South LA, maybe we'll see everyone at the summit, as well as look for our .LA Summit October 27th and 28th. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thank you.